You've probably never heard this before. Jordan Peterson just pulled the curtain to reveal what really happened behind the scenes when he first shot to public light. It wasn't just a revelation of how the dynamics around communication technologies had changed, but also how they were becoming a vehicle for social and political evolution that many people had not yet caught on to. But I think this conversation with Rex Murphy reveals something else as well, which is a side of social media stardom that takes a toll on you like nothing else. Just watch this next clip and you'll see how that's a price that Jordan Peterson has paid well.
There were days upon days where there were reporters lined up coming into the house one after the other, and that really hasn't stopped. I mean, it stopped, let's say, in the last 2 months. This is also something that's been very difficult to both understand and, I would say, in a strange way, to tolerate, because I've become opened up to the trouble that people have in a way that far exceeds even what I experienced as a clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have watched quite frequently is the way that people respond to being mobbed on Twitter.
Yeah.
You know, now I've almost stopped looking at Twitter. It's been about 3 months. Civilized, socialized people cannot tolerate being mobbed. Well, the right thing to do is to understand that if you haven't done anything wrong, you don't apologize. Now that's very difficult.
Yeah,
it's very difficult. And then to wait, because if you wait 2 weeks, people will come to your defense.
Yeah, they will.
But it takes the people who will come to your defense 2 weeks to get their act together, where it takes the activists who are unbelievably organized 15 seconds to mob you. Although that was starting to change, I thought, well, what the hell is this YouTube? What are we doing here? And then it struck me that, well, this was a Gutenberg revolution that we were experiencing, that the spoken word was now as permanent and as immediate, more immediate than the printed word, and just as permanent, and with a much larger audience, because more people, as far as I can tell, can listen than can read. And even with my book, a tremendous percentage of my books have been sold in audio form.
Wow.
So I really started to think about YouTube at that point, and I suppose that was one of the things that drove me in my foolish curiosity to make those political videos that I made in October, which was the first time I'd ever tried something like that. And that was, in some sense, I wouldn't call it a whim, but you know, I woke up at 3 a.m. because I was so irritated about this bill and its attempt to force a certain type of language usage, and I could see what was behind that quite clearly. I thought, well, you know, this really is annoying me to death, and often what I would do when something was annoying me to death was get up and write, but I thought, well, I'll make a YouTube video and see what happens. It's like, well, I certainly saw what happens. It's like,
I think Jordan Peterson is a living example of that. For context, his best-selling book 12 Rules for Life has sold around 10 million copies in over 6 years, which sounds impressive until you realize how that's still a tiny number on the grand scale of the world population and his potential audience. Meanwhile, videos on his YouTube channel immediately reached nearly 8 million people, which simply cannot be rivaled by any piece of text that has to be tediously written, printed, and distributed. Perhaps the difference between reading and watching is that the first is a more active form of learning than the latter, and in linguistics, the principle of least effort suggests that the easier information is to consume, the fewer people you will lose by the end. That's why the medium of book reading is losing out to the new world of YouTube and podcasts, which are much easier to consume. The habit of book reading among Americans is at the lowest point that it has been according to a Gallup poll. I think if you're being honest, Jordan Peterson prior to becoming popular online was not the most groundbreaking academic influence in the field of psychology, since his ideas were mainly synthesized from existing psychological knowledge, and yet, when you measure his true influence as the reach and impact he has had, it's no wonder that it came after Jordan's ideas and words became more accessible through YouTube. But like many things, stardom online like the one Jordan Peterson enjoys doesn't come without a cost. It became clear to him that social media was also much more toxic than the sophisticated and academics he had been used to, and it was a place where millennials and Gen Z reigned supreme. In fact, if you look at the massive reaction to the videos he made against Bill C-16 back in 2016, you see how most of it was online vitriol and threats that took the greatest toll on him. That's what happened every time Jordan engaged in Twitter feuds before realizing it was just too much. Despite the massive amplifier that this new technology was, Jordan Peterson quickly realized that it also amplified some of our worst tendencies at trying to deride and bring out each other down. On that, I do believe there's a lesson that all of us can take. Simply put, don't apologize for something you believe is correct just because it offends someone. And that holds true for the online world above everything else, since online it's usually thousands of people that are offended at the same time, and you can't make everyone happy. The thing about an apology is that it's actually a tacit admission of guilt, and you cannot give that concession to a crowd and a mob, even if it's virtual. Jordan himself made this truth clear in a simple quote, and I quote, "Never apologize to a mob. You're not dealing with individuals who you can establish a relationship with. You're dealing with a soulless idea that has people in its possession." Once you recognize that, you realize that it's always worth it to stand your ground rather than cede that space to the mob, because when you do, there will be a new mob every time until you're not really allowed to believe or say anything out of line.
The thing is, you've got a hold of something.
Yeah.
Let's say it's YouTube, and you think you know what it is, and you don't. You don't have any idea what it is, and neither does anyone else. And that's certainly still the case. We have no idea what these multiple technologies are doing to us, but I can tell you that YouTube is an overwhelming force, and it's becoming more and more powerful day by day. I've especially seen that in countries. Slovenia was a good example, where no one really trusts the mainstream press. All the young people do, and not so young either, pretty much everybody under 35, I would say, all they watch is YouTube. And that's the case all over the world. And so it's, I think on my YouTube channel, my videos have been watched 110 million times. And the total viewership is probably, because people keep cutting them up and distributing them, which is something else that can be done on YouTube, right? You can have a dialogue, right, where people edit and make their own commentaries, and the total for that would be at least 500 million.
Sure, God.
It's very comical to watch an organization like CBC try to adapt itself to YouTube, because they'll put on a 10-minute clip, and they break all the rules. They put two 30-second commercials in front of it, which you can't skip. So
no one will watch it.
No one will watch it. What you do with YouTube is you put on a 10-second commercial and you let people skip it after 5 seconds. That's the rule. They break that rule. Then they don't allow comments. And so they'll put up something you might want to watch, for 10 minutes, and they'll get 20,000, 30,000 views, because they don't take the conventions of they don't take it seriously. And it's like, you should take YouTube seriously, man. See, one of the things that's interesting about the YouTube stars, like Rogan and say Dave Rubin, is that they don't think their audience is stupid.
That's a good beginning.
It is a really good beginning. And one of the things I've noticed that at my lectures is a tremendous number of the people who are coming to my lectures are people in that camp. They're working class, often men, but not always. So women as well, but more men, and they're long-haul truckers or construction workers, and they're listening to 3-hour lectures and complex lectures too, and it's because they're not stupid.
I think it's safe to say that in the modern world, YouTube's become a political force in itself along with the rest of social media. Never in history has information and intellectual dialogue become so decentralized and accessible for the masses, and it's ushering in a wave of enlightenment against which no tyrant or dictator can stand for long. You remember what happened back in 2011 when the Arab Spring? It was the protest and self-immolation of one man, a street vendor in Tunisia named Mohamed Bouazizi, who set himself on fire to protest against economic hardship and police brutality. But the fire metaphorically ignited much more than his body, because the news of his act spread like wildfire to the entire world through social media, in a way that could not be controlled by the centralized authorities in the mainstream media. We saw another example of just how powerful social media is as a political force, when it was arguably the most pivotal force in riling and gathering people together in Turkey against the attempted military coup back in 2016. President Erdogan was locked in a television station at the time, but still found a way to speak to the Turkish people through a TV presenter's iPhone using FaceTime. We've seen plenty of similar examples of that all around the world, with a video site like YouTube serving as the greatest platform for intellectual engagement that humans have ever built. And it's precisely that power and reach that catapulted Jordan Peterson's words across the world and allowed millions more people to engage with his ideas that would have been possible otherwise. That's perhaps one small example of just how closely intertwined our technologies and social structures have become in the 21st century.